Do we have too much government?
We need to put people ahead of corporate profits.
This system is so lopsided. This threat is a real threat to democracy.
And I think that's really important. That's something we haven't been doing in this country for a long time.
Where do you start? What do you do? How do you do it?
Access to Democracy is sponsored by Thomson Reuters, providing legal professionals with the intelligence, technology, and human expertise they need to find trusted answers. Products include Westlaw, Practical Law, and Firm Central legal practice management software for small law firms. Thomson Reuters, the answer company. Online at thomsonreuters.com. Access to Democracy is made possible in part by a donation from Firefly Credit Union. Firefly is the new name of U.S. Federal Credit Union, which has proudly served the financial needs of the Greater Twin Cities community since 1925. At Firefly, we guide our members forward and give them the power to chase dreams by delivering the financial solutions they need to get ahead. From checking accounts to mortgages, we'll light the way. We are Firefly Credit Union, and this is Life Illuminated. And Dr. Charles Crutchfield of award-winning Crutchfield Dermatology in Eagan, acknowledged as one of the nation's best physicians. A Minnesota native who trained at the Mayo Clinic, Dr. Crutchfield personally treats all patients and states that experience counts and quality matters. Crutchfield Dermatology. Look good, feel great, with beautiful skin.
Welcome. Access to Democracy back with you. Alan Miller with you as well, and a return guest of many, many shows. Representative Sandy Masin, District 51A.
Hello,
and
Alan.
Running for re-election for your fifth term.
I am.
Yes.
I am.
Hard to believe. How time flies.
Something like that. Well, I think when you're in the House and running every other year, it does seem like.
I think you first came to Access as a city council member, and it's onwards and upwards.
Something like that. Definitely know the community, and it's
Some elections a little more difficult than others, and but every one a challenge.
exactly. I mean, there's always something new that's
Especially
happening.
in a district that's really considered a purple district, not really red or blue. So.
That's what I usually tell people. It takes a lot of people to get me elected in this district. I mean, but I think we are starting to see a little bit of change in the while the demographics are changing. I think we are starting.
A lot of people have been doing a lot of work for a lot of campaigns.
Exactly.
As we head into your fifth term. So.
Exciting times.
Well, we've had exciting times in the state of late. We just yesterday concluded a very painful nurses' strike against 5 Allina hospitals. And I know you were very involved in that, so tell us your take on it.
Okay, and I did sign a letter in support of the Minnesota Nurses Association. And I remember one time when some of the legislators were out there going in support of the nurses, where and on that same day there was a full-page ad taken out by the Allina institution, signed by their CEO, and I just was appalled. I mean, these are the people that are in charge of the nurses, and yet their verbiage or the terminology I just thought was so very condescending, and I just thought it was really inappropriate. I mean, the nurses are first line of defense. I mean, it takes both mentally and physically a lot to do to be a nurse, and I think they really should be appreciated, and they deserve the compensation. And to try to really cut their compensation when I know people at the higher end are getting
nickel and diming it is really
exactly
what it is.
And I mean, we're constantly seeing that, where they're trying to minimize people that are making decent wages, and we know statistics show that people at the higher end are making absolutely, to me, outrageous salaries.
I call them obscene.
I will go with that too. So at least the strike is settled. I guess, yeah, maybe and there was
The
definite
nurses
compromise.
didn't come away thrilled,
No,
but they did the appropriate thing in terms of patient care. They settled it so they could get back to their hospitals and get back to their patients. And yes, it was the longest strike that we have had, and it was a very painful one. And of course, the hospital immediately brings in substitutes. I call them scabs, but it's not the same. They're not familiar with the hospital. They're not familiar with the patients. They're not familiar with the units.
and plus, to do that, they spent a small fortune, which again, you could have been using to pay your own nurses. I mean, it is something that I don't understand.
Something we have been seeing more and more
Exactly.
of across society, however, to the detriment of ultimately the middle class.
Right, and it just seems like, I guess my confidence in some of the people in the higher echelon is really being eroded. I mean, I don't understand the ethics and the morality of making huge salaries when you're letting the people at the lower levels make minimal salaries.
Well, Tom Brokaw wrote about the greatest generation, and if I was writing, I would call this the greediest generation, at least for people at the top.
No question. I mean, we know that the statistics bear that out. The huge amounts that the CEOs are making are just not right. But again, if it's private industry, in many cases, how do you go about changing that? I mean, it really is something that is, I think, at grassroots. We need to be paying attention to how we're spending the money, where the money is going, and you need to be asking, especially if you're a shareholder in certain companies, what is your CEO making, and how much is that? What is the spread within your company?
In some cases, there is just no justification, in my mind, to some of these salaries, and or the golden parachutes that they leave with after a scandal or after a retirement. More often lately, it's been the scandal. And they walk away with really more money for leaving than most people make in a lifetime.
Exactly.
Far more money.
Now, there truly is something wrong with the way our economy is going and the compensation that many people are getting. And I'm thinking, certainly there are boards for these associations as well, but some of this, as I said, it really, I think, is just so incredibly bad at this point when we're seeing the huge gap in income. And as you said, we are losing the middle class. I find that really very, very concerning.
Well, we just concluded, and it doesn't look like we're going to have a special session, through no fault of the Democrats, I should say, and the governor, but we just concluded a very disappointing session of the legislature in which some really important items were left undone. I know you're one of the people who will walk across the aisle, who can negotiate with the other side, who has been responsible for some bipartisan efforts and some successes. But that's got to be disconcerting also because of the leadership on the Republican House this time. Really, really impeded progress for the state of Minnesota, which has been traditionally one of the most progressive states.
Coming off of 2013, 2014, when we accomplished so much, including all-day kindergarten, and we balanced the budget for the first time in a decade, and then to come into the past 2 years, and again, that was done under the DFL leadership. This year, the Republicans were in charge of the House of Representatives, and we did not get out a comprehensive transportation bill. We didn't get out the tax bill. We didn't get out the bonding bill. And I just found that, extremely difficult. And just to give an example, I was door knocking, and this one woman who normally votes Democratic, she was really thinking not voting. She is so angry. And the reason was her daughter is in construction. Because we didn't pass the bonding bill, she now has to help her daughter make ends meet paying the mortgage. And I mean, and the deal is, right now, we have been so fortunate that the feds have not raised the interest rates. So we've been, some of us have been trying to get the bonding bill out even last year, knowing that we have the lowest interest rates we've seen in a long time. And by the time we get, the next session, that might not be the case. The feds may be raising the rates
Very well might
before we
not be the case.
And so we've wasted a lot of money, and in the meantime, we still have the projects that need to be done.
Wasting a lot of money, wasting a lot of time, really hurting people's lives, and
Exactly.
doing a disservice to the state. And one of the things that really troubles me is that people take an oath not only to uphold the Constitution, but really to do the best they can for their constituents. And then they get involved in personal, really matters in terms of personal philosophy, and they just throw all that out the window. And, I have said time and again, without a doubt, that works for the legislature here, and that doubt is spelled D-A-U-D-T.
Without a doubt. Yesterday I was at a function where Professor David Schultz was talking, and he gave a history about how things have really changed. I mean, going back several decades, most of the candidates coming from either Republican or Democrat were more towards the center. And he said, now you're seeing just the opposite. That has been the big change over the last couple of decades. So it's really hard for people, for the extremists to come together to make a compromise. But people expect it. I mean, if I'm
People expect it, and people should have it.
Exactly.
But, going back to the Pawlenty era, remember there were 7 Republicans who crossed the aisle to vote with the Democrats
for the transportation bill.
transportation bill. Every one of those people was primaried by the Republicans next year, punishing them for doing something that was best for the state. And that's so antagonistic to everything that I stand for and believe in. And I know in your case it's the same thing. There is no explanation for it that's a logical explanation in my mind.
Not if you take an oath that you're going to do the best for the state of Minnesota. And as I said, most people, when I'm door knocking, and I can't believe our district is that different from anybody else, but they said, you have a job to do, they expect you to do it, they expect you to do it on time. And they don't understand when you don't. And again, a lot of it has to do with our process. But I think this year it was just such poor management. It was unbelievable, and the bigger bills waited to the end for no reason.
So what does that leave on the table for the next session, which starts in January?
Well, we still need to get out a comprehensive transportation bill. I mean, that to me, we've been trying to do that for the last couple of years. That has got to be done. And I'm assuming we're going to have to do something with the tax bill because we didn't get that passed this year. So I'm thinking what's going to happen is they're going to have to pay attention to some of these things right at the beginning, because I don't think you can wait till the end of the session.
Well, that seems to be a tactic, though. Stifling, handling these things when they should be handled, and then at the last minute trying to slam something down the throats of the legislatures, in some cases where they haven't even had an opportunity to read the bill. I mean, there has to be some way that you have at least 48 hours on a big bill to look at it, have your staff look at it, and make recommendations. Not that it comes in at midnight, half an hour before you're supposed to adjourn, and ultimately are forced to adjourn without acting on that legislation.
And going back to the management, the House was adjourned early, which, again, people are standing on the floor, and he adjourned it before the end. So technically, if the Senate if we had had time, we might have been able to get the bonding bill passed if he had not adjourned it early. I guess I know people are really frustrated by that, And I'm thinking perhaps this year you might be seeing bills where the big bills have to be out like maybe a week or 10 days before the end of session. So at least if there's a problem between the House and the Senate, et cetera, you have some lead time to get it done and get the job done before we actually have to adjourn.
Now, what committees do you look forward to being on? Of course, you're named to committees, so you don't have complete choice there.
Yeah.
But
I would still like to be on transportation. That to me has been so very important, and it's because we have done so little in the last couple of years. It's even more important that we do it. So I definitely would like to stay on that one. Education is a really big deal, both for the basically the pre-K through 12, as well as higher ed. And I've never been on a higher ed before, and that's the area where I'm hearing we really need to concentrate on doing something about student tuition, because both people considering going to college, I mean, that's placing some major roadblocks. But I'm talking to people who are already graduated. In this case, for instance, it was a teacher. And she said, both she and her husband are teachers, and they're having trouble making ends meet, but the only way they can get their salaries increased is if they get another degree, and if you get another degree, you're also increasing the amount of the loan that you have. So it's not really a good something to look forward to. So I mean, we need to be paying attention to the salaries of our teachers as well. And I know in Egan too, somebody had said like last year there was a really good teacher, first year teacher in one of our Egan schools, but because she couldn't afford housing in Egan, she ended up not staying here. She went back home. She was from one of the rural areas and just decided to go back home and live rather than stay here and try to make ends meet.
and we can't afford to have that.
No, I mean, and I'm hearing that the number of teachers that are applying for some positions is really going down. So I think all the, especially during the previous administration when there was so much bad-mouthing about the teachers and education, I think that's part of the reason that we're seeing this, let alone the fact that for starting teachers, they're not making enough.
Now, you're one of the few voices that's been loud and strong about homelessness in Minnesota. One would not think that with where we stand in terms of other states, that homelessness is a problem. And yet, if you go downtown Minneapolis, you go downtown St. Paul, last night where we were actually downtown, there are people on every corner. Now, you don't know whether those people are really addicted and looking for money, or whether they have a genuine need for some place to live. How do you approach homelessness?
And that is a really tough one, and it's something that we're facing here in Dakota County. I mean, I had, during the summer, there was a woman that lost her home, and for a number of weeks she was literally living in her car, because I know she had parked it at first in one of the parking lots of a hotel, and they eventually realized what she was doing and took her out of that. And it's really hard. I mean, for one thing, I mean, our vacancy rate in apartments is like 1% or less, so there aren't many vacancies, and because of that, the prices are fairly exorbitant. And then even in our shelters, I mean, if you are a woman that is not in a domestic abuse, some type of abusive situation, or if you don't have kids, there really is no place for women in Dakota County at this point. So I mean, we're shortage of housing, all affordable housing, and shelters, et cetera, at this point. And I know there's some of our ministers are really working, at least to have like a temporary shelter for people, because again, when I'm told if somebody comes to you right, immediately and they need housing, you can't just put them into somebody's house without doing some background checks. So we need to find some immediate housing.
And that requires legislation, and it requires a budget.
And it's well, I think, I know that one of the in the meantime, till they can get a permanent place, I think some of the churches were doing is on a rotating basis. Like one month would field have people come there, and then rotate that among the churches in our area, which is great. But again, the deal is that provides maybe overnight shelter. It doesn't mean that these people can stay there all day long. So you still need that. And I went to the forum for the county commissioners, and they were talking about homelessness there as well. And the deal, and also you get into mental health. I mean, we have a lot of mental health issues, but until you can get somebody in stable housing, you can't provide the services that they need till that happens.
Well, I look at the national ticket, and definitely not on the Democratic side. I see some serious mental health issues, but we won't go into that.
There you go.
Now, you do have an opponent. You've had a variety of opponents, and as I said, you're seeking your 5th term, which says something about your drive and capacity to win. But your opponent this year faced some individual problems, and has that affected the campaign at all?
From my perspective, no. I mean, because we know we run our campaign no matter what happens. I think it will probably depend on how people interpret the actions.
You do what you do.
Yes.
But I understand that the Republicans have even taken your opponent's name off.
That's that's what I was told. So,
off the list of people that they are endorsing. And as a matter of fact, he was unendorsed by the Republican leader, at least, and somebody else.
I guess that's one way of putting it, is unendorsing, or the vocabulary left a lot to be desired in how some of the Republican leadership are addressing this.
The conduct of
this
person.
And I mean, you can't excuse the conduct per se, but there is, how would I put it, there is a proper way or a respectful way of dealing with an issue. And I guess too often this year, regardless
they throw
of the
them
race.
Under the bus.
Exactly, yeah. And that to me is just wrong.
So, what is your favorite part of being a legislator?
Probably just meeting with the people and talking with them and learning, anytime you're able to help somebody, I mean, that's a good day. There are a lot of issues, especially dealing with mental health, where I don't think we've made the strides that we need to make. So that's kind of disconcerting. But there are a lot of times where we do help people, and I think that's the better part of the day, and that's what to me is the most important part. Certainly passing the budget is important, and providing the services, but there's the state covers a lot of territory, and for people that don't know how to, which agency or how to get the help that they need, so they do come, they will call their legislator, and we have a really good staff to help us get that accomplished. So I mean, that to me is the better part of what we're doing.
Now, you are originally from Cleveland.
I am.
Went to Valparaiso University. Do you have any feelings about the American League Baseball finals that are just about to start tonight?
No, actually I don't. I mean, certainly, because I grew up in Cleveland, I certainly have favorites, but I've lived in Minnesota for such a long time. But it is exciting to see Cleveland get to move forward.
It's been a long time.
It is, and that's it.
Been able to drink at that fountain.
Yeah. I mean, they have had an incredible time over the last couple of decades, and it's been really hard to go back home sometimes and to see the difficulty that they have. But so to see where they're stepping ahead, and that's pretty exciting.
Last week we had several representatives in from the Twin Cities Film Fest and from the Film Board, and the fact of the matter is one of the things we discussed is what great movement forward since the legislature has again authored some generous snowbait deductions for people making films here, and we're getting a lot of films made here all of a sudden. That helps the state tremendously. And yet, again, there was opposition to the film board, primarily from the conservative side of the aisle. I don't understand it. It gives us tourism, it gives us exposure, it gives us really prestige, and it gives jobs to thousands of very talented people who are here. Fortunately, we have such a great labor force to pull from. Don't understand it.
That makes two of us. Yeah, I mean, we have so many small theaters, so many artistic things within our state. So, I mean, it just doesn't make sense to me that we wouldn't want to take advantage of that and keep these people here and just expand their opportunities.
And it shows, proof is that it's been very positive. I don't know. It's one of the frustrating things that I see, and that's on a small scale. There are other things that are on a big scale, such as you talk about education and transportation and a crumbling infrastructure, an aversion to passing a budget without tax relief to the top of the ticket, which seems to be just a conservative Republican mantra. Make it easier for the people at the top. The people at the top don't need it easier.
Exactly.
The people who need it easier are the great swath of people who make up the middle class.
And especially until we deal with some of these lower or inadequate wages. I mean, that to me that's the overriding thing. I mean, we can't leave these people behind. And essentially what I was trying to explain to people is, if you're letting companies pay somebody, even minimum wage, in our area actually people are making more than minimum wage just because they need to, they're having such a hiring problem. But the deal is, for people that come to public assistance, essentially the state is subsidizing these companies that are making huge profits. And that to me makes no sense.
And one of the things that we haven't talked about, and I've been remiss in not bringing it up, is global warming, the environment, etc. We are already out of time, but we got to pursue that, and we have to talk about that again before the legislature reconvenes, because if we don't do something about it, we're just writing our planet off. And
in our district, I mean, we've always had people that are extremely environmentally conscious. And so, I mean, I'm really comfortable being very aggressive in that area because that's important to the people in our district.
Thank you, Representative Sandy Masin.
Thank you,
District 51A.